She wasn't supposed to speak. Not to him. Not to a man whose name could ruin her with a single whisper. But Alara Vance, governess, survivor, invisible woman, had finally reached her breaking point. In the middle of a rain-soaked London street, she stood toe-to-toe with one of England's most powerful dukes and told him exactly what she thought of men like him. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was the first honest thing she'd done in years. And it would change everything. Stay with me until the end. Hit like and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The rain came down in sheets, turning the cobblestones into rivers, and the air into a cold, wet curtain that clung to everything it touched. Alara Vance stood in the middle of the street, her cloak soaked through, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and stared at the massive black carriage that blocked the entire thoroughfare. She'd been standing there for 10 minutes. 10 minutes of her life she would never get back, watching the rain soak through her only decent boots, feeling the chills settle into her bones, while the driver of that ridiculous carriage sat perched on his high seat like some kind of indifferent god, completely unbothered by the line of carts, pedestrians, and increasingly angry merchants piling up behind him. "Move!" someone shouted from the back of the growing crowd. "Get that bloody thing out of the way!" The driver didn't even turn his head. Alara felt something inside her chest crack. It was a small sound, barely noticeable, like the first splinter in a dam before the whole thing comes crashing down. She'd been holding it together for so long, years actually, swallowing every insult, every dismissal, every time someone looked straight through her like she was made of glass. She was a governess. She was nothing. She knew that. The world had made it abundantly clear. But today, for reasons she couldn't quite name, she was done. She stepped forward. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice cutting through the rain. "Your carriage is blocking the street." The driver finally looked down at her. His expression was somewhere between bored and mildly annoyed, like she was a particularly persistent fly. "His Grace will move when His Grace is ready," the man said, each word dripping with condescension. "His Grace," Alara repeated slowly, "can move now." A ripple went through the crowd. A few people laughed nervously. Someone muttered, "Oh, she's done for." The driver's face darkened. "You'd best watch your tongue, girl." "And you'd best watch your employer's carriage," Alara shot back, her voice steady despite the fact that her heart was now hammering against her ribs. "Because if he thinks he can just park himself in the middle of a public street and expect the rest of us to stand here in the rain while he, what, takes a nap? Writes a letter? Contemplates his extraordinary importance? Then he's more arrogant than I thought." Dead silence. Even the rain seemed to pause for a moment. The carriage door opened. Alara's stomach dropped. She'd gone too far. She knew it the second the door swung wide and a tall figure stepped out into the downpour, moving with the kind of casual grace that came from a lifetime of never having to hurry for anyone or anything. He was younger than she expected, mid-30s maybe. Dark hair plastered to his forehead from the rain, sharp features, and eyes that locked onto hers with the precision of a hawk spotting prey. Lucian Ashford, Duke of Greystone. She'd never seen him in person before, but she knew who he was. Everyone did. He owned half of London, had the ear of Parliament, and could destroy someone's life with less effort than it took most people to tie their shoes. And she had just called him arrogant to his face. "You," he said, his voice low and dangerously calm, "have something to say to me." Alara's throat went dry. Every instinct screamed at her to apologize, to bow her head, to melt back into the crowd and disappear before this got any worse. But something else, something reckless and furious and tired of being small, pushed her forward instead. "Yes," she said. "I do." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Go on then." "You're blocking the street." "So I've been informed." "And you don't care." "Should I?" The question was so casual, so utterly unbothered, that it snapped the last thread of Alara's self-control. "You should care," she said, her voice shaking now. Not from fear, but from the sheer force of everything she'd been holding back for years. Because there are people in this street who have jobs to get to, deliveries to make, children to feed. They don't have the luxury of sitting in a warm carriage while the world waits for them. They can't afford to be late because some lord decided that his time is worth more than theirs. She was breathing hard now, dimly aware that the entire street had gone silent, that every eye was on her, that she was probably about to be arrested, or worse. But she couldn't stop. "You walk through this city like you own it," she continued, her voice rising. "And maybe you do. Maybe you own the buildings and the land and the laws that keep people like me in our place. But you don't own us. You don't get to act like we're invisible just because it's convenient for you." Lucian Ashford stared at her. For a long, terrible moment, he said nothing. Then slowly, he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who'd just found something unexpectedly interesting. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elara Vance." "Well, Miss Vance." He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the water dripping from his coat, the faint scar above his left eyebrow. "You've just made a rather bold accusation. Do you have any idea what happens to people who speak to me the way you just did?" "I imagine," Elara said, lifting her chin, "they get crushed." "Usually, yes." "Then crush me. But move your carriage first." Another beat of silence. Then Lucian Ashford laughed. A real laugh, sharp and surprised. "Get back in the carriage, Thomas," he called to his driver without taking his eyes off Elara. "We're moving." The driver looked like he'd been slapped. "Your Grace, now!" Thomas scrambled back onto his seat, and within moments the massive carriage began to roll forward, clearing the street. The crowd erupted into scattered applause and relieved chatter, people rushing forward to reclaim their space. But Lucien didn't move. He stood in the rain, studying Elara like she was a puzzle he hadn't quite figured out yet. "You're either very brave," he said quietly, "or very stupid." "Probably both," Elara admitted. "Where do you work?" The question caught her off guard. What?" "Your employer. Who is it?" She hesitated. Giving him that information was dangerous, but lying felt worse. "Lady Pemberton, on Cavendish Street." He nodded slowly, committing it to memory. "I'll remember that." Then he turned and walked back toward his carriage, leaving Elara standing in the rain, her heart pounding, her hands shaking, and the sudden, terrible certainty that she had just made the worst mistake of her life. By the time Elara made it back to the Pemberton house, she was soaked to the bone and shivering so hard her teeth rattled. She slipped in through the servants' entrance, hoping to avoid notice. But of course, Mrs. Halloway, the head housekeeper and Elara's personal tormentor, was waiting in the hallway, arms crossed, face pinched with disapproval. "You're late." "I'm sorry, the street was blocked." "I don't want excuses. Lady Pemberton has been asking for you. The children are wild, the nursery is a disaster, and you smell like wet dog." Elara bit back a response. "I'll change quickly and see to them." "See that you do." Mrs. Halloway swept away, and Elara trudged upstairs to the tiny room she shared with two other servants. She peeled off her wet clothes, pulled on a dry dress that was only slightly less worn, and tried to ignore the way her hands were still shaking. She'd confronted a duke. A duke! What had she been thinking? She hadn't been thinking. That was the problem. She'd been feeling anger and frustration and a deep, bone-deep exhaustion from years of being treated like she didn't matter. And now she was going to pay for it. Elara took a breath, steadied herself, and headed to the nursery. The Pemberton children, 2 boys and a girl, ages 5 to 9, were in the middle of a screaming match over a wooden horse when she walked in. The youngest, Thomas, burst into tears the moment he saw her. "Miss Vance, Henry took my horse." "I did not. It was my horse first." "Was not. Was too." "Enough," Elara said quietly. Silence fell. It always amazed her, that moment. She wasn't loud. She wasn't particularly intimidating, but the children listened to her in a way they didn't listen to anyone else, and she suspected it was because she actually saw them, not as miniature adults to be molded or problems to be managed, but as people. "Henry," she said, "give Thomas the horse." "But give him the horse. You can play with it after supper." Henry grumbled but handed it over. "Thank you. Now, all of you, sit. We're going to read." They settled onto the floor around her, and Elara pulled out a battered copy of Robinson Crusoe. She'd read it to them a dozen times already, but they never seemed to tire of it. As she read, she felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. This was the only part of her life that felt real. The only place where she wasn't just surviving, but actually doing something that mattered. She'd wanted to be a doctor once. It was a ridiculous dream for a woman, especially one with no money, no connections, and no family to speak of. But when she was younger, before her father died, before the debt swallowed everything, she'd spent hours in his study, reading his medical texts, learning anatomy and physiology, and the mysteries of the human body. She'd been good at it too, but dreams didn't pay rent. And after her father's death, Alara had learned very quickly that survival meant making herself useful in whatever way the world would allow. So she became a governess. It wasn't what she wanted, but it was what she had. She was halfway through a chapter when the door to the nursery opened and Lady Pemberton swept in, her face tight with anger. "Miss Vance, a word!" Alara's stomach sank. "Of course, my lady." She followed Lady Pemberton into the hallway, closing the door behind her. "I have just received," Lady Pemberton said, her voice icy, "a very interesting letter." Alara's heart stopped. "It seems that you were involved in some kind of incident this afternoon, in the street, with the Duke of Greystone." "Oh no." "My lady, I can explain. Can you?" Lady Pemberton's eyes flashed. "Can you explain why my children's governess thought it appropriate to publicly humiliate one of the most powerful men in England? It wasn't. Do you have any idea what you've done? The Duke of Greystone could destroy this family with a word. He could ruin us, and you dared." "He was blocking the street." Alara's voice came out sharper than she intended. "People were waiting in the rain. I only asked him to move." "You don't ask men like that to do anything. You bow your head, and you wait and you thank the heavens he doesn't notice you." "I'm tired of not being noticed." The words hung in the air between them. Lady Pemberton stared at her, and for a moment Alara thought she saw something almost like pity in the older woman's eyes. Then it was gone. "Pack your things," Lady Pemberton said quietly. "You're dismissed." Alara felt the floor tilt beneath her. "My lady, please, effective immediately. I'll provide a reference, but I won't lie. You're reckless, Miss Vance, and I can't have that in my household." "Please, I have nowhere to go." "You should have thought of that before you decided to play hero." Lady Pemberton turned and walked away, leaving Alara standing in the hallway, her entire world collapsing around her. Fuck. Alara packed her belongings into a single battered trunk. It didn't take long. She didn't own much. 2 dresses, a spare pair of stockings, a few books she'd managed to save from her father's collection, a small silver locket that had belonged to her mother. That was it. That was her entire life. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and tried to think. She had a little money saved, enough for maybe a week's rent in a boarding house, if she was careful. After that, she didn't let herself finish the thought. There was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," Alara said, expecting Mrs. Halloway with some final piece of bad news. Instead, it was Clara, one of the kitchen maids, a girl barely 16 with wide eyes and a tendency to gossip. "Miss Vance," Clara whispered, glancing nervously down the hallway. "There's someone here to see you." Alara frowned. "Who?" "A man. Real fancy. Says he's from the Duke of Greystone's household." Alara's blood ran cold. "What?" "He's waiting in the servants' hall. Mrs. Halloway didn't want to let him in, but he insisted." Alara stood on shaking legs. This was it. The Duke had sent someone to finish what Lady Pemberton had started, to make sure she was not only dismissed, but completely ruined. She followed Clara downstairs, her mind racing through a dozen terrible possibilities. But when she reached the servants' hall, the man waiting for her wasn't what she expected. He was tall, well-dressed, with steel-gray hair and the kind of posture that came from military training. He looked her over once, his expression unreadable, then gave a short nod. "Miss Alara Vance?" "Yes." "My name is Captain Garrett. I'm in the employ of His Grace, the Duke of Greystone." Alara's throat tightened. "If you've come to threaten me—" "I've come," Captain Garrett interrupted, "to offer you a position." Alara blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "His Grace was impressed by your performance this afternoon. He has a project that requires someone with your particular talents." "My talents," Alara repeated slowly, "which are honesty, courage, a complete disregard for social niceties." "That's not a talent. That's a character flaw." "His Grace disagrees." Captain Garrett pulled a sealed letter from his coat and handed it to her. "He'd like to meet with you tomorrow. 10 o'clock. This address. Alara stared at the letter like it might bite her. And if I refuse? Then you refuse. His Grace doesn't force anyone into his service, but I'd suggest you read the letter before you make your decision. He tipped his hat and left. Alara stood in the empty hallway, holding the letter, her mind reeling. Finally, she broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was sharp and precise. Miss Vance, you called me arrogant this afternoon. You were right. But you also said I don't see the people around me. That, I'm afraid, is where you were wrong. I see far more than you think. Come to the address below tomorrow at 10. I have a proposition for you, one that might make better use of that fire you're so fond of throwing around in public streets. Or don't. Stay invisible if you prefer, but somehow I don't think you do. L. Ashford. Alara read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, tucked it into her pocket, and made her decision. The address led her to a building in Whitechapel. Not a palace, not some grand estate, a crumbling, soot-stained structure that looked like it might collapse if someone sneezed too hard. Alara stood outside, staring up at the peeling paint and broken windows, and wondered if this was some kind of elaborate joke. Then the door opened, and Captain Garrett appeared. Miss Vance, right on time. Where am I? She asked. St. Bridget's Orphanage, or what's left of it. He led her inside, and Alara's stomach turned. The place was a nightmare. Children, dozens of them, maybe more, crammed into rooms that were too small, too dark, too cold. The smell of unwashed bodies and sickness hung in the air. A girl no older than 6 coughed wetly in the corner, her face pale and hollow. This is one of 12 orphanages His Grace oversees, Captain Garrett said quietly. All of them are in similar condition. Why? Alara's voice came out strangled. Why would anyone let it get this bad? Neglect, corruption, indifference. Take your pick. And the Duke? He wants to fix it? He wants to try. But he needs someone who understands medicine, someone who can assess the situation and help implement real change. Alara turned to stare at him. You're offering me a job as what? A medical consultant? Something like that. I'm not a doctor. No. But you're the closest thing His Grace could find who also isn't afraid to tell him when he's wrong. Before Alara could respond, another door opened and Lucian Ashford stepped into the room. He looked different here, less polished, more tired. His coat was gone, his sleeves rolled up, and there was a smudge of dirt on his jaw. Miss Vance, he said, thank you for coming. Your Grace. She managed a stiff curtsy, still too shocked to process what was happening. I assume Captain Garrett has explained the situation. Barely. Lucien's mouth twitched. Fair enough. Walk with me. He led her through the orphanage, pointing out the worst of it, the leaking roof, the broken stove, the lack of proper beds. As they walked, he spoke in a low, clipped voice. I inherited oversight of these places 3 years ago. I've been trying to reform them ever since, but every time I propose changes, I run into the same wall. Bureaucracy, resistance, people who profit from keeping things exactly as they are. And you think I can help with that? I think you can help me see what I'm missing. You told me I don't notice people. You're right. I've spent my life in drawing rooms and Parliament. I don't know what it's like to be invisible. But you do. Alara stopped walking. So you want me to, what, be your guide to poverty? I want you to be honest. I want you to tell me what needs to change and how to do it, and I want you to help me fight the people who are going to try to stop us. Why me? Because you're angry, and anger, Miss Vance, is a powerful tool when it's aimed at the right target. Alara looked around the orphanage, at the children huddled together for warmth, at the peeling walls, at the sheer crushing weight of suffering that no one seemed to care about. Then she looked back at Lucian Ashford. If I do this, she said slowly, I'm not going to bow and scrape and pretend you're always right. I wouldn't expect you to. And if I think you're making a mistake, I'm going to say so. Good. And I want a real salary, not charity, a wage I can live on. Done. Alara took a breath. Then I accept. Lucian smiled, a real smile this time, not the predatory one from the street. Welcome to the fight, Miss Vance. The first week nearly broke her. Alara had thought she understood poverty. She'd lived through her father's debts, survived on scraps as a governess, knew what it meant to stretch a shilling until it screamed. But walking into St. Bridget's every morning, seeing the same hollow eyes, the same rattling coughs, the same children who'd learned not to cry because no one came when they did, that was something else entirely. She started keeping a notebook. Symptoms, patterns, anything that might help her make sense of the chaos. A boy with a fever that wouldn't break. 3 girls with the same rasping cough. An infant who wouldn't eat. On the 4th day, the infant died. Elara had been checking on the other children when Matron Wicks, a bitter woman who ran St. Bridget's like a prison warden, appeared in the doorway, the tiny body wrapped in a stained blanket. "Another one gone," Matron Wicks said flatly, like she was reporting a broken dish. Alara's hands clenched. What was wrong with her? Does it matter? They die all the time here. It matters, Alara snapped, because if we know what killed her, we can prevent it from killing someone else. Matron Wickes snorted. You think you're going to save them? You're wasting your time, girl. This is what happens to unwanted children. They die. That's the way of things. She walked away, and Alara stood there shaking with rage and grief and a helplessness so profound it felt like drowning. When Lucien arrived that afternoon, she was waiting for him in what passed for the orphanage's office. A cramped room with a desk, 2 chairs, and stacks of ledgers that hadn't been updated in months. He took one look at her face and stopped. What happened? A baby died this morning. His jaw tightened. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be useful. She shoved her notebook across the desk toward him. I've been tracking symptoms. Fever, respiratory issues, malnutrition. Half these children are sick, and the other half are getting there. The building is falling apart. There's no heat. The food is barely edible, and Matron Wickes treats them like livestock. Lucien picked up the notebook, scanning her notes. You think she's part of the problem? I think she doesn't care if they live or die, which makes her exactly the wrong person to be running this place. Fire her. Alara blinked. What? You have my authority. If she's not fit for the position, remove her. I've been here 4 days. I can't just... You can. You will. He set the notebook down and met her eyes. I told you I wanted honesty. I also want action. If you see something that needs to change, change it. Don't wait for my permission. It should have felt empowering. Instead, it felt like being handed a sword and told to fight a war she didn't know how to win. But Alara had never been good at backing down. Fine, she said, but if I'm firing her, I need to hire a replacement, someone who actually cares. Do you have someone in mind? Not yet, but I'll find them. Lucien studied her for a moment, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like respect. You're not what I expected, Miss Vance. What did you expect? Someone more manageable. Then you hired the wrong woman. He smiled. No, I don't think I did. That night, Alara drafted a notice for a new matron and posted it at 3 different churches. By the end of the week, she'd interviewed 5 candidates and hired a stern but kind widow named Mrs. Fairchild, who'd raised 6 children of her own and had no patience for cruelty. Matron Wicks left without a fight, but not without a parting shot. You think you're making a difference? She hissed as she packed her things. But you're just another fool playing savior. These children are doomed, and so are you. Alara watched her go and felt nothing but relief. Mrs. Fairchild started immediately, and within days the atmosphere at St. Bridget's began to shift. Small things, mostly, cleaner floors, warmer blankets, someone who spoke to the children like they were worth speaking to. But small things added up. Alara spent her mornings at the orphanage and her afternoons meeting with builders, suppliers, anyone who might help repair the worst of the damage. Lucien had given her access to his accounts, and she used the money ruthlessly. New beds, better food, a stove that actually worked. It still wasn't enough. She was sitting in the office one afternoon, staring at a stack of bills she couldn't make sense of, when Lucien walked in without knocking. We have a problem, he said. Alara looked up. Just one? Lord Pembroke is blocking the roof repair. She frowned. Who's Lord Pembroke? The man who oversees the parish funds. Technically, I need his approval to make major expenditures on properties like this. Then get his approval. I've tried. He's refused 3 times. Alara's temper flared. Why? He didn't say, but I have a theory, which is that someone's paying him to keep things exactly as they are. The words hung in the air like smoke. Alara set down her pen slowly. You think someone's profiting from this? I think it's a possibility worth investigating. How? Lucien pulled a ledger from his coat and dropped it on the desk. Start here. This is the parish accounting for the last 3 years. See if you can find anything unusual. Alara opened the ledger and immediately wanted to throw it out the window. The handwriting was barely legible, the numbers didn't add up, and whole sections were missing entirely. This is a mess, she muttered. I'm aware. Who keeps records like this? Someone who doesn't want them kept at all. Alara looked up at him. You're serious about this? You really think someone's stealing from orphans? I think, Lucien said carefully, that there's a great deal of money allocated to these institutions, and very little of it seems to be reaching the children. Where it's going is the question. And if we find out, then we stop it. And if the people doing it don't want to be stopped, then we fight them. Alara stared at him, searching for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that he didn't mean it. But Lucien's expression was steady, his jaw set, and she realized with a jolt that he was absolutely serious. This wasn't a game to him. This wasn't some wealthy lord's pet project that he'd abandoned the moment it got difficult. He actually cared. All right, she said quietly. Let's find out who's stealing. It took her 3 days. 3 days of cross-referencing numbers, tracing payments, following paper trails that led nowhere, and then suddenly everywhere. Her eyes ached, her head pounded. She barely slept, but she found it. Here, she said, stabbing her finger at a line in the ledger. Lucien leaned over her shoulder, so close she could smell rain and something faintly like cedar. Look at this. Every month there's a payment listed as general maintenance, £500. That's not unusual. Except the amount never changes, not in 3 years, and there's no record of what the money was actually spent on. Lucien went very still. Show me the other orphanages. Alara pulled out the remaining ledgers and spread them across the desk. Same pattern, every institution every month. £500 listed as maintenance with no supporting documentation. That's £6,000 a year, Lucien said softly. Per orphanage. 12 institutions, £72,000. Alara felt sick. Where's it going? That, Lucien said, his voice hardening, is what we're going to find out. The trail led them to a man named Thomas Carver, a clerk in the parish office who handled the payments. Lucien and Alara arrived at his office unannounced, and the moment Carver saw them, his face went white. Your Grace, he stammered. This is unexpected. Where's the money going, Mr. Carver? Lucien's tone was pleasant, but there was steel underneath. I'm not sure what you mean. The maintenance payments. £72,000 a year. Where is it going? Carver's hand shook. I just processed the request, Your Grace. I don't ask questions. Then I suggest you start. I can't. If I tell you, he'll ruin me. Who will ruin you? Carver's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Alara stepped forward. Mr. Carver, children are dying because of this. Whatever you're afraid of, it can't be worse than that. You don't understand, Carver whispered. He owns half of Parliament. If I cross him... Give me a name, Lucien said quietly. Carver swallowed hard. Lord Pembroke. The same man who'd blocked the roof repair. Alara's stomach twisted. Lucien's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Thank you, Mr. Carver. You've been very helpful. They left the office, and Alara had to practically run to keep up with Lucien's long strides. What now? She asked. Now, Lucien said, we confront him. Just like that? Do you have a better idea? Maybe one that doesn't involve walking into the lion's den with no plan? Lucien stopped and turned to face her. Miss Vance, if we try to build a perfect case, Pembroke will have time to cover his tracks. The only advantage we have right now is surprise. And if he denies it, then we make him prove it. Alara wanted to argue, wanted to say this was reckless and dangerous and exactly the kind of thing that would get them both destroyed. But she'd agreed to fight. And you didn't win fights by playing safe. All right, she said, let's go. Lord Pembroke's estate was everything St. Bridget's wasn't. Gleaming, opulent, obscenely comfortable. They were shown into a sitting room that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, and Alara had to clench her fist to keep from saying something she'd regret. Pembroke himself appeared a few minutes later, a heavy-set man with thinning hair and the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your Grace," he said warmly, shaking Lucian's hand. "What a pleasant surprise, and who is this?" "Miss Alara Vance, my consultant." Pembroke's gaze slid over her dismissively. "Charming. What can I do for you?" Lucien didn't waste time. "I'd like to discuss the parish orphanage accounts." Pembroke's smile tightened. "I'm afraid those are rather dry matters for a social call." "This isn't a social call." The temperature in the room dropped. Pembroke settled into a chair, his smile fading. "Very well. What about the accounts?" £72,000 a year in maintenance payments, with no documentation. I want to know where the money is going. I'm sure it's all properly allocated. Show me the receipts. I don't have them on hand. Then get them. Pembroke's face flushed. "Your Grace, I don't appreciate your tone. I've been managing these funds for years without complaint, because no one was looking closely enough. Are you accusing me of something? I'm asking you to account for £72,000. If you've done nothing wrong, that shouldn't be difficult." The two men stared at each other, and Alara could feel the hostility crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. Finally, Pembroke stood. "I think you should leave." "Not until I get answers." "Then I'll have you removed." "Try it." Pembroke's jaw worked. For a moment, Alara thought he might actually call for his servants, might actually try to throw a duke out of his house. Instead, he turned his gaze on Alara, and his eyes were cold as winter. "You," he said softly. "You're the one pushing this, aren't you?" Filling his Grace's head with wild accusations. "I'm the one who found the discrepancies," Alara said evenly, "but the accusations aren't wild. Do you know what happens to people who meddle in things they don't understand?" "I'm about to find out, I imagine." Pembroke smiled, a terrible, knowing smile. "Yes, you are." He walked to the door and opened it. "Get out, both of you, and don't come back." Lucien didn't move. "This isn't over, Pembroke." "No," Pembroke agreed. "It's not." They left, and Alara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. "That went well," she said when they were back in the carriage. Lucien's expression was grim. "He's going to fight back." "I noticed. Are you prepared for that?" Alara thought about the children at St. Bridget's, the baby who'd died, the hollow eyes and rattling coughs, and the sheer crushing weight of suffering that men like Pembroke profited from. "Yes," she said. "I am." 2 days later, Alara was arrested. She'd been at St. Bridget's, checking on a little girl with pneumonia, when 2 constables appeared at the door. Captain Garrett tried to stop them, but they had a warrant, signed by a magistrate, charging Alara with theft. "Theft of what?" she demanded. £500 from Lord Pembroke's estate," one of the constables said. "He says you took it during your visit." Alara's blood ran cold. "That's a lie." "Tell it to the magistrate." They clapped her in irons, actual irons, rough metal that bit into her wrists, and dragged her out into the street. A crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion, and Alara heard the whispers start immediately. "That's the Duke's woman. Heard she was stealing, probably seduced him. Common thief." She kept her head up, refused to let them see her break, but inside she was screaming. Pembroke had made his move, and she'd walked right into it. The cell they threw her in was cold and damp and smelled like rot. Alara sat on the narrow bench, her wrists still aching from the irons, and tried to think. This was a setup. Obviously. Pembroke had planted the money, or claimed it was missing, and now he was using the law to destroy her. And it would work. She had no proof, no witnesses, nothing but her word against a lord's. She was going to be convicted, hanged, probably, or transported if she was lucky. The door clanged open and Lucien strode in, Captain Garrett close behind. "Out!" Lucien snapped at the guard. "Your Grace, I can't." "Out! Now!" The guard fled. Lucien crossed to Alara in 3 strides, his hands gripping her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" "No, just furious. Pembroke's claiming you stole from him during our visit." "I know." It's a lie. I know that too, but can we prove it? Lucien's hands tightened. I'll fix this. How? I'll talk to the magistrate. I'll pay whatever. No! Alara pulled back, her voice sharp. Don't you see? That's exactly what he wants. You, using your power to make this go away. It'll look like you're protecting a criminal. He'll use it against you. I don't care. I care. The words came out louder than she intended, echoing off the stone walls. I care because if you ruin yourself trying to save me, then everything we've done, everything we're trying to do, it all falls apart. The children lose, Pembroke wins, and I become the woman who destroyed the one person actually trying to help. Lucian stared at her, his jaw working. So what do you suggest? He said finally. Alara took a breath. Let me stand trial. Absolutely not. Listen to me. If I run, I look guilty. If you make this disappear, it looks corrupt. But if I stand trial, if I face this head on, then we force Pembroke to prove his case. And when he can't, and if he does, if he's rigged this so thoroughly that you're convicted anyway, then I'm convicted. But at least we'll have tried. Alara, it was the first time he'd used her given name. You can't ask me to do this, he said quietly. You can't ask me to stand by and watch you hang for something you didn't do. I'm not asking, I'm telling you. She met his eyes, steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. This is my fight now too. Let me fight it. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. All right, but we do this my way. I'm hiring you the best solicitor in London, and we're going to tear Pembroke's story apart piece by piece. Agreed. And if things go wrong, if it looks like you're going to be convicted, I'm getting you out of the country. I don't care what it takes. Lucien, those are my terms. Take them or leave them. Alara wanted to argue, wanted to say she could handle this alone. But the truth was, she was terrified. And having Lucien in her corner, having someone who believed her, who was willing to fight for her, that meant everything. All right, she said quietly. Your terms. He reached through the bars and took her hand, his grip warm and solid and real. We're going to win this, he said. Alara wished she could believe him. The trial was set for 3 weeks later. 3 weeks that felt like 3 lifetimes. Lucian hired a solicitor named Richard Thornwell, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who'd built his reputation defending the indefensible and winning. He visited Alara in her cell twice, asking questions that felt like scalpels cutting through her story, looking for weaknesses. Did you touch anything in Pembroke's house? He asked during the second visit. I sat in a chair, that's all. You're certain? Yes. Did you bring anything with you? A bag? A reticule? No. And you never left the room? Not even for a moment? Alara thought back, her mind replaying every second of that disastrous meeting. No. I was there the entire time. Thornwell made a note. Then their case rests entirely on Pembroke's word. They'll need a witness or physical evidence to make it stick. And if they have one, then we discredit it. He looked up, his expression unreadable. Miss Vance, I've defended many people in my career. Some were innocent, some weren't. I'm going to ask you once, and I need the truth. Did you take that money? No. Even if it meant helping those orphans? Even if you thought it was justified? I didn't take it. Thornwell studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Because the moment you're on that stand, they're going to try to paint you as a desperate woman who'd do anything, lie, steal, seduce a duke, to escape poverty. We need to make sure that picture doesn't stick. After he left, Alara sat in the cold cell and felt the weight of what was coming settle over her like a shroud. The newspapers got hold of the story within days. Alara couldn't read them herself. The guards weren't that generous. But Lucian told her what they were saying, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. They're calling you my mistress. Alara almost laughed. Of course they are. They're saying I hired you to satisfy certain needs, and when you got greedy, you started stealing. Creative. This isn't a joke, Alara. I know. She gripped the bars of her cell, meeting his eyes. But getting angry about it won't help. They're going to say whatever makes the best story. We just need to make sure the truth is louder. But the truth was hard to hear over the roar of scandal. The stories grew more elaborate by the day. Alara was a seductress, a schemer, A woman who'd clawed her way from nothing and would do anything to stay afloat. Some papers even dug up her past, her father's debts, her dismissal from the Pemberton household, and twisted it all into a narrative of moral decay. The worst part was watching what it did to Lucian. He came to see her every day, and every day he looked more worn, more angry, more like a man watching something precious being destroyed and unable to stop it. "They're calling for my resignation from the Reformist Committee," he said one afternoon, his voice flat, "saying I've lost all credibility." "Have you?" "In their eyes? Probably." Alara's chest tightened. "I'm sorry. Don't." The word came out sharp. "Don't apologize for something that isn't your fault." "It is my fault. I pushed for this. I wanted to confront Pembroke. And you were right to. We both were." He leaned against the bars, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "Pembroke is a coward and a thief. And the only reason he's winning right now is because the system is rigged in his favor. But that doesn't make you wrong. It doesn't make me innocent either, not in the eyes of people who matter. Then we'll change their minds." "How?" Lucien was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "By proving Pembroke is lying, by finding evidence that exonerates you completely." "There is no evidence. He made sure of that. There's always evidence. We just have to find it." Captain Garrett found it, or rather, he found the person who could provide it. He came to Lucien's townhouse late one night, his face grim, and handed over a letter. "Read it," he said. Lucien unfolded the paper. It was written in a cramped, nervous hand. "Your Grace, my name is Sarah Drummond. I work as a housemaid in Lord Pembroke's estate. I saw what happened the day you visited. I saw him take the money from his own safe and hide it in his study before you left. Then I heard him tell his man to report it stolen and blame the woman. I kept quiet because I was afraid. But I can't stay quiet anymore. Not when someone innocent is going to hang for something she didn't do. If you want my testimony, I'll give it, but I need your protection. Lord Pembroke will destroy me if he finds out. S. Drummond." Lucien read it twice, then looked up at Garrett. "Is she credible?" "I spoke to her myself. She's terrified, but she's telling the truth. Can we keep her safe?" "If we move fast." Lucien's jaw set. "Then move." Sarah Drummond was a thin, pale woman in her early 20s, with eyes that darted around like a cornered animal. Garrett brought her to a safe house on the edge of the city, and Lucien and Thornwell interviewed her there. "Tell us what you saw," Thornwell said, his tone gentle. Sarah twisted her hands in her lap. "I was cleaning the hallway outside Lord Pembroke's study. The door was open a crack, and I heard voices, his and another man's. I looked in, just for a moment, and I saw him take a stack of banknotes from the safe. £500, he said. Then he put it in the bottom drawer of his desk." "What happened next?" "He told the other man, Mr. Hargrove, his steward, to wait until you and the lady left, then report the money missing. Said to make sure everyone knew the woman had been alone in the room at some point." "But she wasn't," Lucien said. "No, sir. I was there the whole time. She never left the sitting room, and she never went near Lord Pembroke's study." Thornwell made careful notes. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because I was scared. Lord Pembroke, he's not a kind man, sir. People who cross him tend to disappear. Or worse." "You're safe now," Lucien said. "I give you my word." Sarah looked at him, her eyes wet. "I hope so, Your Grace. Because if this goes wrong, we're both dead." The prosecution fought hard to keep Sarah's testimony out of the trial. They argued she was biased, that she'd been coerced, that her word meant nothing compared to a lord's. But Thornwell was relentless. "This woman," he thundered in the courtroom, "is risking everything to tell the truth. She has nothing to gain and everything to lose, and yet she's here because she cannot stand by and watch an innocent person hang for a crime that never happened." The judge, an older man named Sir William Harcourt, listened with an expression carved from stone. When both sides had finished their arguments, he leaned back in his chair and surveyed the courtroom. "I will allow the testimony," he said finally, "but I will be watching very carefully for any sign of fabrication or coaching. Proceed." The day Sarah took the stand, the courtroom was packed. Alara sat in the dock, her heart hammering, and watched the nervous housemaid settle into the witness chair. Thornwell approached slowly, his voice calm. Miss Drummond, please tell the court what you witnessed on the afternoon of March 15th. Sarah's voice shook at first, but as she spoke, it grew steadier. She recounted every detail: the open door, the conversation she'd overheard, the money being taken from the safe and hidden in the desk. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Then the prosecution's barrister, a sneering man named Caldwell, stood up. Miss Drummond, he said, his tone dripping with condescension, you expect this court to believe that you just happened to witness this alleged conspiracy? I didn't happen to witness anything, sir. I was doing my job. And yet you said nothing for weeks. Why? I was afraid. Afraid of what? A respectable lord? Or afraid that your lies would be exposed? I wasn't lying. Weren't you? Caldwell leaned in. Isn't it true that you were recently dismissed from Lord Pembroke's service for theft? Sarah's face went white. No, that's not. Answer the question. Were you dismissed? Yes, but for theft? He said it was theft, but I didn't. So you have a history of dishonesty and a grudge against Lord Pembroke. And now you expect us to believe you're telling the truth? Sarah looked helplessly at Thornwell, then at Lucian, then at Alara. Her eyes were full of panic. I am telling the truth, she whispered. Caldwell smiled. Of course you are. The damage was done. Alara could see it in the faces of the jury, doubt creeping in, suspicion taking root. When court adjourned for the day, Thornwell pulled Lucian, Alan, and Alara aside. They're going to tear her apart, he said bluntly. Pembroke planted that theft accusation months ago, probably as insurance. He knew she'd seen something, and he made sure she'd be discredited if she ever talked. Can we prove she was framed? Lucian demanded. Maybe, but it'll take time, and we don't have time. The trial resumes tomorrow, and if we can't shore up her credibility, the jury's going to dismiss everything she said. Alara's mind raced. What about the money? If Pembroke hid it in his desk, is it still there? Unlikely. He's had weeks to move it. But if it is there, if we can prove he lied about it being stolen, Thornwell shook his head. We can't search his estate without a warrant, and no magistrate is going to grant one based on the testimony of a dismissed servant. Then we don't ask for permission. Both men stared at her. You're suggesting we break into Pembroke's house? Lucian said slowly. I'm suggesting we find the evidence that proves I'm innocent. However, we have to. That's illegal. So is framing someone for theft? Thornwell looked between them, his expression caught somewhere between admiration and horror. If you're caught, it's over. Not just for Miss Vance, for you, Your Grace. They'll destroy you. They're already trying to destroy me, Lucian said. At least this way we go down fighting. Alara felt something shift in her chest, a wild, reckless hope that maybe, just maybe, they could actually win this. When do we go? She asked. Tonight, Lucian said, before Pembroke has a chance to move anything else. They broke her out of custody 2 hours before midnight. It wasn't technically a jailbreak. Lucien had enough influence to arrange a temporary release for a medical consultation, but it felt like one. Captain Garrett drove the carriage, taking back streets and alleys, while Alara sat inside with Lucien, her nerves stretched so tight she thought they might snap. You don't have to do this, Lucien said quietly. Yes, I do. If we're caught, we won't be. He looked at her, and in the dim light of the carriage, his expression was impossible to read. You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the most reckless. I thought we'd established it was both. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Yes, I suppose we did. Pembroke's estate was dark when they arrived, most of the staff already asleep. Garrett had arranged for a distraction, a small fire in the stables, nothing dangerous, just enough to draw the night watch away from the house. Lucien picked the lock on a side door with surprising skill. Where did you learn to do that? Alara whispered. Misspent youth. They slipped inside, moving through the darkened hallways like ghosts. Alara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure someone would hear it. The study was on the second floor. Lucien tried the door, locked. He pulled out his picks again, and within seconds the lock clicked open. The room was exactly as Alara remembered it, opulent, suffocating, designed to intimidate. Lucien went straight to the desk and started searching drawers. Anything? Alara asked, keeping watch at the door. Not yet. Minutes ticked by. Alara's nerves screamed at her to run, to get out before they were caught, but she forced herself to stay still. Then Lucian made a soft sound of triumph. Got it. He held up a leather pouch. Inside were banknotes, exactly 500 pounds. Alara stared at it. That's not possible. He wouldn't just leave it here. Maybe he thought no one would dare look. Or maybe it's a trap. The words had barely left her mouth when the door behind them swung open and the lights blazed on. Lord Pembroke stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 constables, his face split in a vicious smile. Well, he said, this is unfortunate. Caught red-handed, breaking into my home, stealing my property. I'd say that's rather damning evidence, wouldn't you? Lucian stepped in front of Alara, the money pouch still in his hand. This is the money you claimed was stolen, the money you framed Miss Vance for taking. Is it? Pembroke's smile widened. Or is it money you just stole from my desk? Tell me, Your Grace, which story do you think a jury will believe? Alara felt the floor drop out from under her. They'd walked right into it. Pembroke had left the money there deliberately, knowing they'd come for it, knowing it would look like theft. He'd won. Arrest them both, Pembroke said to the constables. The men stepped forward, and Lucien's hand went to his coat, reaching for something. A weapon, maybe, Alara didn't know. But before anyone could move, a voice cut through the room like a blade. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Everyone turned. Captain Garrett stood in the hallway, and he wasn't alone. Behind him were 6 men, Lucien's own people, armed and ready, and standing next to Garrett, looking small but fierce, was Sarah Drummond. We heard everything, Garrett said calmly. Every word, including the part where you admitted to framing Miss Vance. Pembroke's face went purple. You have no authority here. Actually, a new voice said, and Sir William Harcourt stepped into view, his expression thunderous. They have mine. The judge looked at Pembroke with something close to disgust. I suspected something was wrong when Miss Drummond's testimony was so conveniently discredited, so I arranged for witnesses to observe this little encounter. And what I've just heard is more than enough to warrant a formal investigation into your conduct. Pembroke opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. Constables, Sir William said, arrest Lord Pembroke on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. The constables hesitated. Pembroke was a lord, after all, but the judge's authority was absolute. They took Pembroke by the arms, and he fought them, his voice rising to a shriek. This is outrageous. I'll have all of you destroyed. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Sir William said coldly. A coward who steals from orphans and destroys innocent lives to cover his tracks. Take him away. As they dragged Pembroke out, still screaming threats, Alara felt her knees go weak. It was over. They'd won. Lucian caught her as she swayed, his arms steadying her. Easy, you're all right. Am I? She looked up at him, and suddenly she was shaking, reaction setting in, the adrenaline draining away and leaving nothing but exhaustion. I thought we were done. I know. His voice was rough. So did I. Sir William approached, his expression softening slightly. Miss Vance, you have my apologies, and my assurance that all charges against you will be dropped immediately. Thank you, Alara managed. Don't thank me. Thank His Grace for being clever enough to bring me in on this scheme before you both got yourselves killed. He nodded to Lucien and left. Alara turned to stare at Lucien. You planned this? The whole thing? Not the whole thing, but I suspected Pembroke would try something, so I asked Sir William to be nearby, just in case. You let me think we were breaking in without backup. If you'd known, you wouldn't have acted naturally. Pembroke needed to believe he'd caught us in a real crime. Alara wanted to be angry, wanted to yell at him for the deception. Instead, she laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that echoed in the empty hallway. You're insane, she said. So are you. I know. They stood there for a moment, neither quite willing to let go. Then Garrett cleared his throat. Hate to interrupt, but we should leave before Pembroke's servants decide to cause trouble. They made it back to the carriage, and as they pulled away from the estate, Alara looked back at the house, at the place where she'd nearly lost everything. But she hadn't lost. She'd fought back, and she'd won. The next morning, the trial reconvened to a packed courtroom. Word had spread about Pembroke's arrest, and the public gallery was crammed with people eager to see how it would all play out. Sir William took his seat and addressed the court with the kind of authority that left no room for argument. In light of new evidence and the arrest of Lord Pembroke on charges of conspiracy and fraud, all charges against Miss Alara Vance are hereby dismissed. Furthermore, I am ordering a full investigation into the financial management of London's parish orphanages. This court stands adjourned. The gavel came down. Alara stood there, stunned, as the courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters shouting questions, spectators cheering or jeering, the whole world suddenly too loud and too bright. Thornwell gripped her shoulder. "You're free, Miss Vance. Congratulations." Free. The word felt strange, foreign. She'd been fighting for so long, fighting to survive, to be heard, to prove she mattered, that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to actually win. Lucien appeared at her side, and without thinking, Alara turned and threw her arms around him. He stiffened for half a second. Then his arms came around her, holding her tight. "Thank you," she whispered against his coat. "For everything. You don't need to thank me. We did this together." "No. You could have walked away at any point, protected yourself, but you didn't. Neither did you." She pulled back to look at him, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Lucien said quietly, "we finish what we started. We reform those orphanages. We make sure Pembroke's crimes are fully exposed, and we prove that the system can change. And if it doesn't want to change?" His smile was sharp and dangerous. "Then we make it." But outside the courthouse, the crowd was waiting, and not all of them were friendly. "Seductress!" someone screamed as Alara and Lucien emerged. "Whore! She's ruined him!" The words hit like stones. Alara tried to keep her head up, tried to ignore them, but there were so many. Angry faces, twisted with hatred, people who'd read the papers and believed every lie. A woman shoved forward, spitting at Alara's feet. "You think you're better than us? You're nothing but a common—" Lucien stepped between them, his voice cold as ice. "Finish that sentence, and I'll have you arrested." The woman backed away, but the crowd pressed closer, and suddenly Alara could feel the danger, the thin edge between anger and violence. Garrett and his men formed a protective circle, pushing through the mob toward the waiting carriage. Someone threw something, a rock maybe, and it hit Lucien's shoulder. He didn't even flinch. They made it to the carriage, and Garrett practically shoved them inside before slamming the door. The driver whipped the horses into motion, and they lurched forward, the crowd's shouts fading behind them. Inside, Alara was shaking again. "They hate me," she said. "They don't know you. They don't want to know me. They've already decided who I am." Lucien's jaw tightened. "Then we'll change their minds." "How? By proving myself over and over again? By being perfect and untouchable and never making a mistake?" She laughed bitterly. "I can't win, Lucien. Even when I win, I lose." "That's not true." "Isn't it? Pembroke's arrested? Yes. But look at what it cost. My reputation is destroyed. Yours is damaged. And no matter how many orphanages we reform, people are always going to remember me as the woman who—" She stopped, unable to finish. Lucien reached across the carriage and took her hands. His grip was firm, grounding. "Listen to me," he said. "I don't care what they think. I care about the truth. And the truth is that you're the bravest, most stubborn, most infuriating person I've ever met. You stood up when no one else would. You fought when it would have been easier to run. And you didn't break." "I almost did." "But you didn't, and that matters." Alara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that made her heart stutter. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Why risk everything for me?" Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who tell me what they think I want to hear. And you've never done that. You've been honest and real and completely impossible from the moment you yelled at me in that street. And I—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I what?" Alara prompted, her voice barely audible. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and terrifying. Alara's breath caught. "Lucien, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know." But Alara was already leaning forward, closing the distance between them, and when her lips met his, the world narrowed to just this. Just them. Just the impossible, reckless truth of what they'd become to each other. When they finally pulled apart, Lucian rested his forehead against hers. "This is going to get worse before it gets better," he said quietly. "Pembroke has allies. They're going to fight back." "I know. And they're going to come after you, after both of us." "I know that too. Are you sure you want to keep going?" Alara thought about the children at St. Bridget's, the ones who'd survived and the ones who hadn't, the broken system that had failed them and the people who profited from that failure. Then she thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, invisible, silent, swallowing every indignity because she had no other choice. She wasn't that woman anymore. "Yes," she said, "I'm sure." They arrived at Lucian's townhouse as the sun was setting. Garrett helped them inside, and Alara was about to ask what happened next when she saw the man waiting in the foyer. He was tall, elegantly dressed, with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. And when he saw Lucien, his expression hardened into something close to fury. "Father," Lucien said, his voice carefully neutral. The Duke of Ashford, Lucien's father, Alara realized with a jolt, looked past his son to where Alara stood. "So this is the woman who's ruined you," he said. Alara had faced angry mobs, corrupt lords, and the entire weight of London's legal system. But standing in front of the Duke of Ashford, this cold, imperious man who looked at her like she was something scraped off his boot, she felt smaller than she had in months. "Father," Lucien said again, his voice tight. "This isn't the time, isn't it?" The older Duke stepped closer, his gaze never leaving Alara. "You've made yourself a spectacle, Lucien. Your name, our family's name, is being dragged through every gutter press in the city. And for what? This woman? Her name is Alara Vance, and she's done nothing wrong. She's a governess who seduced you into throwing away your reputation on some misguided crusade." "I seduced no one," Alara said, her voice steady despite the anger rising in her chest. "And the only crusade here is trying to stop children from dying in filth while men like Pembroke profit from their suffering." The Duke of Ashford's eyebrows rose. "Bold words for someone in your position." "My position," Alara shot back, "is standing right here, refusing to apologize for telling the truth." For a moment, the Duke looked almost impressed. Then his expression hardened again. "Lucien, I need to speak with you, alone. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Miss Vance. This is family business." "She is family business." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The Duke of Ashford's face darkened. "You cannot be serious. You're not actually considering—" "I'm considering," Lucien said quietly, "that for the first time in my life, I've found someone who sees me as more than a title and a bank account. Someone who fights for what's right even when it's dangerous. Someone worth standing beside." "Someone," his father said coldly, "who will destroy everything you've built." "No, someone who's helping me build something better." The Duke stared at his son, and Alara saw something flicker in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. "If you continue down this path," he said finally, "you'll lose everything. Your position in Parliament, your standing in society, your future. They'll tear you apart." "Let them try." "Lucien, I'm done, father. Done pretending that keeping my head down and maintaining appearances is more important than actually doing something that matters. Done watching people suffer because it's inconvenient to help them. Done being the man you want me to be instead of the man I actually am." The Duke of Ashford was silent for a long moment. Then he turned and walked toward the door. "You're making a mistake," he said without looking back. "And when it all falls apart, don't expect me to pick up the pieces." The door closed behind him, and the silence that followed felt enormous. Alara turned to Lucien, who stood very still, his jaw clenched. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes, I did. He's your father, and he's wrong." Lucien finally looked at her, and his expression was raw. "About you. About this. About everything that matters." Alara wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the pain she could see in his eyes. But before she could find the words, Captain Garrett appeared in the doorway. "Your Grace, we have a problem." "What now?" Lucien's voice was weary. "Pembroke's allies are mobilizing. Word is they're planning to discredit the entire investigation. claim it was a political attack, that the evidence was fabricated. Of course they are. Lucian scrubbed a hand over his face. Who's leading the charge? Lord Harrington and Viscount Blackwell. They've already started spreading rumors that Sir William was bribed. Elara felt her stomach drop. Can they make that stick? If they throw enough money and influence behind it, yes. Lucien's hands clenched into fists. Then we need to move faster. Get ahead of their narrative before they bury the truth completely. How? Garrett asked. Elara's mind was already racing. They'd won the battle against Pembroke, but the war was far from over. His allies weren't going to let this go quietly. They'd fight back with everything they had: money, power, connections that stretched into every corner of London's elite. And they'd lose. Because Elara had just realized something. The elite might control the courts and parliament, but they didn't control public opinion. Not completely. We go to the people, she said. Both men looked at her. What? Lucian asked. Pembroke's allies can spread all the rumors they want in their drawing rooms and gentlemen's clubs. But the public, the actual people of London, they're the ones who'll decide what's true. We give them the evidence, all of it. Show them exactly what Pembroke did and who's trying to protect him. Garrett frowned. How? The papers. The ones that actually reach working people, not just society columns. We give them the story, the real story, and we make it impossible to ignore. Lucian was staring at her, and slowly, a smile spread across his face. You want to weaponize the press. I want to tell the truth loud enough that lies can't drown it out. It's risky. If we get it wrong, if the story doesn't land the way we need it to, then we're no worse off than we are now. But if it works... Elara met his eyes. If it works, we turn this entire thing around. Lucian nodded slowly. All right, let's do it. They worked through the night. Elara drafted the statement herself, her hand cramping as she wrote out every detail. Pembroke's theft, the forged evidence, the children dying while he profited. She didn't soften it, didn't make it palatable. She wrote it raw and true and furious. Lucien added the financial records, the proof of where the money had gone and who had benefited. Captain Garrett compiled witness statements from Sarah Drummond and others who'd seen Pembroke's corruption firsthand. By dawn, they had a package of evidence that was damning, comprehensive, and undeniable. The question was which paper would print it. The Times won't touch it, Garrett said. Too many of Pembroke's allies own shares. What about the Daily Chronicle? Elara suggested. Maybe, but they're cautious. They won't print something this explosive without verification. Then we verify it for them. Lucien stood, determination hardening his features. I'll go myself. Put my name and title behind every word. If they won't believe Miss Vance, they'll have to believe a duke. 2 hours later, they were sitting in the offices of the Daily Chronicle, facing a skeptical editor named Marcus Webb. Webb was a wiry man in his 40s with ink-stained fingers and the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. He'd read through their evidence twice, and now he was looking at them like they'd just asked him to publish a confession of murder. You understand, he said slowly, that printing this will start a war. Yes, Lucien said. Pembroke's allies will come after this paper with everything they have. Lawsuits, threats, maybe worse. I understand. And you're willing to put your name on it? Your title, your reputation, everything? I am. Webb leaned back in his chair, studying Lucien. Why? You're a duke. You could walk away from all of this, protect yourself, let someone else fight this battle. Why risk it? Lucien glanced at Elara, then back at Webb. Because some things are worth risking everything for. And making sure children don't die in filth while corrupt men profit from their suffering is one of them. Webb was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the papers again, read through them one more time, and finally nodded. All right, we'll print it. Front page, tomorrow's edition. But if this blows up in our faces, I'm holding you personally responsible. Fair enough, Lucien said. They shook hands, and as they left the office, Elara felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. The Daily Chronicle hit the streets the next morning, and London exploded. The headline was simple and devastating. Duke exposes orphanage scandal. Lord Pembroke arrested for theft and fraud. Below it was everything, the evidence, the witness statements, the financial records showing exactly where £72,000 a year had been going. And at the bottom, in bold print, Lucien's statement. I stand behind every word of this article. Lord Pembroke and his allies have profited from the suffering of innocent children. That ends now. I call on Parliament to investigate every institution under parish oversight and to hold accountable anyone found complicit in this corruption. Lucien Ashford, Duke of Greystone. By noon, the paper had sold out. By evening, every other press in London was scrambling to cover the story. And by the next morning, the public response was overwhelming. People poured into the streets demanding answers. Mothers who'd lost children to the orphanages, workers who'd seen the conditions firsthand, ordinary Londoners who were simply outraged that this had been allowed to happen. The pressure was immediate and crushing. Within 3 days, Parliament announced a formal inquiry. Within a week, 2 more lords connected to the scandal had resigned, and Lord Pembroke, sitting in his cell awaiting trial, watched his entire network of protection crumble around him. But the backlash came too. Elara had expected it, but that didn't make it easier. The society papers that had called her a seductress now called her a radical, a troublemaker, a woman with dangerous ideas about her place in the world. They published editorials warning that if women like her were allowed to challenge their betters, society itself would collapse. She tried to ignore it, but the words still stung. Worse were the threats. They started as letters, anonymous, vicious things left at Lucien's townhouse or slipped under the door of St. Bridget's. Most were just words, ugly and hateful, but some carried a darker edge. You've destroyed good men. You'll pay for that. Watch your back, whore. Accidents happen. The Duke can't protect you forever. Captain Garrett took them seriously, assigning guards to follow Elara whenever she left the house. Lucien wanted to lock her away somewhere safe until it all blew over, but Elara refused. I'm not hiding, she said firmly. That's exactly what they want. If I disappear, they win. If you get hurt, then I get hurt. But I won't stop. He looked at her with something that might have been exasperation or admiration or both. You're impossible. So are you. I know. The inquiry began 2 weeks after the Chronicle article, held in a grand chamber at Westminster that was packed with spectators, journalists, and every member of Parliament who wanted to either support or destroy what Lucien had started. Elara sat in the gallery, watching as witness after witness took the stand. Sarah Drummond testified first, her voice stronger now, recounting everything she'd seen. Then came the accountants who'd traced the missing funds. Then Mrs. Fairchild, speaking with quiet fury about the conditions she'd found at St. Bridget's. And then Lucien. He walked to the front of the chamber with his head high, and when he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the room. For years, he said, we have allowed the most vulnerable members of our society to suffer, because it was easier than fighting the systems that failed them. We've turned a blind eye to corruption, to cruelty, to the deaths of children who had no voice and no power. And we've done it because challenging those systems was inconvenient, because it threatened the comfortable order we'd built. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled lords and ministers. But that order was built on suffering, and it's time we tore it down. The chamber erupted, some in applause, others in outrage. The chairman called for order, but it took several minutes for the noise to die down. When it finally did, Lord Harrington, one of Pembroke's staunchest allies, stood up. Your Grace, he said, his voice dripping with false courtesy, you speak of suffering and corruption, but isn't it true that your involvement in this matter is motivated less by charity and more by personal entanglements? Lucien's expression didn't change. Meaning? Meaning your relationship with Miss Vance, the woman who started all of this. Some might say you've been manipulated, that your judgment has been clouded by... My judgment, Lucien interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a blade, is perfectly clear. Miss Vance uncovered evidence of systematic theft and corruption. She risked everything to expose it. And yes, I support her, not because I've been manipulated, but because she's right. A convenient answer. It's the truth, which seems to be something you and your allies have difficulty recognizing. Harrington's face reddened. You forget yourself, Your Grace. No, I finally remembered myself. And what I remember is that my title comes with responsibility, not just to preserve power, but to use it for something good, something that actually matters. He turned to address the entire chamber. Lord Pembroke stole from orphans. That is fact, supported by evidence. His allies are now trying to discredit that evidence because they're afraid of what else we'll find if we keep looking. But I'm not afraid, and I won't stop. The applause this time was louder, stronger, coming from the public gallery, and even some of the younger MPs who'd grown tired of the old guard's stranglehold on power. Alara felt tears prick her eyes. He'd done it. He'd stood in front of the most powerful men in England and refused to back down. The inquiry lasted 3 more days. By the end, the evidence was overwhelming. Pembroke was formally charged with fraud, theft, and conspiracy. 2 other lords were implicated and arrested, and Parliament voted to create a new oversight committee for all orphanages and charitable institutions with Lucien at its head. The victory was real, tangible, undeniable, but it came with a cost. Lucien's father stopped speaking to him entirely. Several of his longtime allies distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with someone who'd become so controversial, and the society invitations that had once flooded his desk dried up to nothing. "You've been blacklisted," Captain Garrett said bluntly one evening, dropping a stack of returned invitations on Lucien's desk. "Half of London won't receive you anymore." Lucien barely glanced at them. "Good. I hated those parties anyway." "Your Grace, this is serious. Your social standing is less important than the work we're doing. I'll survive without champagne and idle gossip." Garrett looked at Alara, who was sitting nearby reviewing plans for the St. Bridget's renovation. "You've turned him into a radical." "No," Alara said, without looking up. "I just reminded him he could be more than what they wanted him to be." Despite the social exile, work on the orphanages moved forward with startling speed. The new oversight committee had teeth, and Lucien used them ruthlessly. Corrupt administrators were fired, buildings were inspected and repaired, food supplies were audited, medical care was mandated. Alara threw herself into it with everything she had. She visited every institution personally, taking notes, identifying problems, pushing for solutions. She hired doctors, negotiated with suppliers, trained new staff in basic medical care. It was exhausting, overwhelming, and more fulfilling than anything she'd ever done. One afternoon, she was at St. Bridget's checking on the new heating system when Mrs. Fairchild found her. "Miss Vance, there's someone here to see you." Alara looked up, surprised. "Who?" She said her name is Catherine Pemberton. Alara's breath caught. Lady Pemberton, her former employer, the woman who'd dismissed her all those months ago. She walked to the front room, steeling herself for another confrontation. Lady Pemberton stood by the window, looking older than Alara remembered, her face drawn with something that looked like regret. "My lady," Alara said carefully, "this is unexpected." Lady Pemberton turned. "Miss Vance, I wanted to apologize." Alara blinked. "I'm sorry?" "For dismissing you, for not listening when you tried to explain. I was frightened of what the Duke of Greystone might do to my family, and I let that fear make me cruel." She took a breath. "I've been following what you've done. The trial, the reforms. You were right. About all of it." "Thank you," Alara said, unsure what else to say. "I also wanted to tell you that my children ask about you constantly. They miss you, and I wondered—" She hesitated. "I wondered if you might consider coming to tea, not as their governess, but as a guest, so they could see you again." Alara felt something warm bloom in her chest. "I'd like that." Lady Pemberton smiled, a real smile, tentative but genuine. "So would I." After she left, Alara stood in the empty room and realized something had shifted. She wasn't invisible anymore. Not to Lady Pemberton, not to the people who read about her in the papers, not to anyone. She'd fought for her voice, and now people were listening. That night, Lucien took her to dinner at his townhouse. A quiet meal, just the 2 of them, away from the chaos that had consumed their lives for months. "You're smiling," he observed as they sat in his private dining room. "Am I? It's nice. You should do it more often." Alara laughed. "I'll try. Though given our track record, something catastrophic will probably happen tomorrow." "Probably." He reached across the table and took her hand. "But tonight, let's pretend everything's perfect." "It's not perfect." "No, but it's better. And that's enough." They ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing, plans for the next orphanage renovation, gossip Captain Garrett had overheard, a book Alara had been reading. It felt normal, almost domestic, and Alara realized with a start that she liked it. After dinner, they moved to the sitting room, and Lucien poured 2 glasses of wine. "I have something to tell you," he said as he handed her one. Alara's stomach tightened. "That sounds ominous." "It's not. Or maybe it is. I'm not sure." He sat down beside her, closer than was strictly proper. "My father came to see me yesterday." "Oh?" "He offered to reinstate me. Full social standing, all invitations restored, complete forgiveness." Alara's heart sank. "What did he want in return?" "That I end the reforms, step down from the oversight committee, and distance myself from you." The words hit like a physical blow. "What did you tell him?" Alara asked quietly. Lucien met her eyes. "I told him to go to hell." Relief flooded through her. "Lucien, I don't want his forgiveness. I don't want a life where I have to choose between doing what's right and being accepted by people who profit from suffering, and I sure as hell don't want a life without you in it." He set down his wine and took both her hands in his. "Alara, I know this is fast. I know we've only known each other a few months, and most of that time has been spent fighting for our lives. But I also know that I've never met anyone like you. Anyone who challenges me and infuriates me and makes me want to be better than I am." Her breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you were right to take a chance on an arrogant duke who blocked your street." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a single sapphire set in gold. "Marry me," he said. "Not because it'll fix your reputation or give you security. Marry me because we're better together than we are apart. Because we can change the world if we do it as a team." Alara stared at the ring, her heart pounding. 100 thoughts raced through her mind. The scandal it would cause. The whispers that would never fully go away. The fact that she'd be stepping into a world that had already tried to destroy her once. But beneath all of that was something simpler, stronger. She loved him. And he loved her. And together, they'd already done the impossible. Why stop now? "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, I'll marry you." Lucien's face broke into a grin, wide and genuine and utterly unguarded, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he kissed her, and Alara kissed him back, and for a moment the whole world narrowed down to just this. 2 people who'd found each other in the middle of a fight and decided to keep fighting together. When they finally pulled apart, Lucien rested his forehead against hers. "You know they're going to lose their minds over this," he said. "I know. There'll be more scandal, more attacks, probably worse than before." "I know that too." "And you're still sure?" Alara looked down at the ring on her finger, then back up at him. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The announcement hit the papers 3 days later. The reactions were exactly as chaotic as they'd expected. Some papers called it a love story. Others called it the final proof of Lucien's fall from grace. Society matrons clutched their pearls. Reformers cheered. The public ate it up like the best gossip London had seen in years. But something else happened too. Letters started arriving. Dozens of them, then hundreds. From working women who saw Alara's story as proof that their voices mattered. From mothers who'd lost children to institutions like St. Bridget's and were grateful someone was finally listening. From young governesses and maids and shopgirls who'd spent their whole lives being invisible and now saw that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to be. Alara read every single one, and she realized that what they'd started wasn't just about orphanages or corruption or even justice. It was about proving that the world could change, that people who'd been told to stay quiet and accept their place could fight back and win. That being seen wasn't a privilege, it was a right. 3 weeks before the wedding, Pembroke's trial concluded. He was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison, with all his assets seized to repay the stolen funds. Alara sat in the courtroom gallery and watched as they led him away, his face twisted with impotent rage. It was over. Really, truly over. Outside, Lucien was waiting for her. "How do you feel?" he asked. Alara thought about it. Tired. relieved, and ready to start building something instead of just tearing things down. He smiled. Good, because I have plans for us. More reforms? Always. But also, he pulled out a folded paper. I bought a house, big enough for both of us and whatever projects you decide to take on. Close enough to the orphanages that you can keep working, and far enough from my father that he can't show up unannounced. Elara laughed. You thought of everything. I try. They walked through the streets together, and for the first time in months, no one shouted insults or threw things. Some people even nodded in greeting. A few women smiled. The tide was turning. By the time they reached the townhouse, Elara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the fragile kind that could be shattered by the next crisis, but real peace, built on the foundation of everything they'd survived and everything they'd won. Inside, Captain Garrett was waiting with more paperwork, always more paperwork, and Mrs. Fairchild had sent over a report on the latest orphanage improvements. But before diving back into work, Lucian pulled Elara close. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For yelling at me in that street, for refusing to be invisible, for being brave enough to fight even when it would have been easier to walk away. Elara smiled. Thank you for listening, for standing beside me, for being stubborn enough to think we could actually win. We did win. We did. And as she stood there in the life she'd built, messy and complicated and nothing like what she'd imagined, but real and true and entirely hers, Elara Vance knew she'd never be invisible again. The wedding was supposed to be a small affair. Lucien had suggested something private, just close friends, minimal fuss, nothing that would invite more scrutiny than they'd already endured. Elara had agreed at first, but then the letters kept coming, hundreds of them, from women across London who wanted to be there, who saw the marriage as something bigger than just two people making vows. They saw it as proof that the world could actually change. So Elara changed her mind. I want it public, she told Lucien one morning over breakfast. He looked up from his newspaper, surprised. You're sure? It'll be a circus. I know, but we've spent months fighting in the shadows, letting other people control the narrative. This is our chance to show them exactly who we are, together, unashamed. Lucien studied her for a moment, then smiled. All right, public it is. They held the ceremony at St. Margaret's Church, Westminster. A deliberate choice. Not some quiet chapel where they could slip in unnoticed, but a place where everyone could see. The day arrived cold and bright, the kind of late autumn morning where everything felt sharp and clear. Elara stood in the vestibule, wearing a dress that Mrs. Fairchild had helped her choose. Cream silk, simple but elegant, nothing like the elaborate confections society brides typically wore. Her hair was pinned up with small white flowers, and the sapphire ring gleamed on her finger. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. A year ago, she'd been invisible, dismissed, forgotten, one more governess in a city full of them. Now she was about to marry a duke. The absurdity of it hit her all at once, and she laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that echoed in the small room. Having second thoughts? A voice asked. Elara turned to find Lady Pemberton standing in the doorway, looking elegant in deep blue. No, Elara said. Just wondering if I've lost my mind. Probably. Lady Pemberton stepped closer, her expression soft. But that's what happens when you decide to change the world. Sanity becomes optional. She held out a small box. I brought you something. A wedding gift. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, simple and beautiful. It was my mother's, Lady Pemberton said quietly. She gave it to me when I married, and I'd like you to have it. You reminded me what it means to have courage. I thought you should have something to remember that. Elara's throat tightened. Thank you. For this. For coming. For everything. Thank you for not giving up on us, even when we didn't deserve it. The church bells began to ring. That's your cue, Lady Pemberton said with a smile. Go marry that stubborn duke of yours. Elara took a breath, steadied herself, and walked toward the sanctuary. The church was packed. Every pew filled, people standing in the aisles, more crowded outside trying to catch a glimpse through the windows. Elara saw familiar faces. Mrs. Fairchild and the staff from St. Bridget's, Captain Garrett looking uncomfortable in formal attire, Marcus Webb from the Chronicle taking notes, Sarah Drummond with tears already streaming down her face. And there, at the altar, was Lucian. He wore formal black, his hair neatly combed for once, and when he saw her, his entire face lit up. Alara walked down the aisle alone. No father to give her away, because her father was gone, and she'd never needed anyone's permission anyway. She walked on her own, head high, meeting the eyes of everyone who doubted her. When she reached Lucian, he took her hand and whispered, "You look terrifying." "Good," she whispered back. The ceremony was traditional, the words familiar and ancient, but when it came time for vows, Lucian had insisted on writing his own. "Alara," he said, his voice carrying through the silent church, "you walked into my life yelling at me in the rain, and you haven't stopped challenging me since. You've made me question everything I thought I knew about power, about duty, about what it means to use privilege for something good. You've driven me half insane, and I wouldn't change a single moment of it." He paused, and Alara saw emotion flicker in his eyes. "I promise to stand beside you, not in front of you, to listen when you're right, which is most of the time, and argue when you're wrong, to fight with you and for you for as long as we both live. You've shown me what courage looks like. Now let me show you what forever looks like." Alara's turn. She hadn't written anything down, trusting herself to find the words when the moment came. "Lucien," she said, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "A year ago, I was nobody, invisible, forgotten, and you saw me anyway. Not because I was convenient or useful, but because you actually looked. You didn't try to save me. You gave me the tools to save myself, and then you fought beside me when the world pushed back." She squeezed his hands. "I promise to keep pushing you, keep challenging you, keep reminding you that a title doesn't define you. Your choices do. I promise to build something worth protecting with you, and I promise to never, ever let you block another street with your carriage." Laughter rippled through the church. The vicar pronounced them married, and when Lucien kissed her, the crowd erupted into applause that shook the rafters. Outside, the streets were lined with people, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, ordinary Londoners who'd come to witness something they'd only heard about in stories. A duke marrying a commoner, love defying every rule society had built. Someone started cheering, and the sound spread like wildfire. Alara stood on the church steps, Lucien's hand in hers, and looked out at the sea of faces. These were her people, the invisible ones, the forgotten ones, the ones who'd been told their whole lives that they didn't matter. And they were cheering for her. The reception was held at Lucien's newly purchased house, a sprawling estate on the edge of the city that he'd had renovated specifically for this day. The guest list was deliberately eclectic. Lords and ladies who'd stood by them mixed with working women, reformers, journalists, and half the staff from every orphanage in London. It was chaotic and loud and absolutely perfect. Alara moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, and found herself cornered by a group of women she didn't recognize. "Miss Your Grace," one of them stammered, "we wanted to thank you for what you've done, for showing us that we don't have to accept the way things are." "You don't need to thank me," Alara said. "You just need to keep fighting." "Will you?" another woman asked. "Keep fighting, I mean. Now that you're a duchess." Alara smiled. "Especially now that I'm a duchess. Being married to Lucien doesn't change who I am. It just gives me a bigger platform to make noise from." The women laughed, and one of them, a young housemaid with determined eyes, said, "Then we'll make noise with you." Later, as the sun set and the party continued, Lucien pulled Alara aside. "I have something to show you." He led her upstairs to a room she hadn't seen yet. Inside was a desk, bookshelves lining the walls, and large windows overlooking the garden. "Your study," he said, "for whatever projects you decide to take on next. I figured you'd need your own space." Alara walked to the desk and ran her hand over the smooth wood. On it sat a stack of letters, more of the ones that had been arriving daily. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, "about what comes next. The orphanages are improving, but there's so much more that needs fixing. Education for girls, medical care for working women, labor laws that actually protect people. Sounds ambitious. Sounds impossible. So did this." Lucien gestured at the room, at the house, at everything they'd built together. "And we did it anyway." Alara turned to face him. "I'm going to keep making trouble, you know. This won't be a quiet life. I'd be disappointed if it was. And I'm going to keep challenging you when I think you're wrong. I'm counting on it. She crossed the room and kissed him, slow and certain. Then let's keep going. 6 months later, Elara stood before Parliament. It had taken months of negotiation, political maneuvering, and calling in every favor Lucian had. Women weren't typically allowed to address Parliament directly, but exceptions could be made for special testimony on matters of public welfare. And Elara had made sure she had something worth saying. The chamber was packed, MPs crowding the benches, journalists filling the gallery, the public crammed into every available space. Elara wore a simple dark dress, her hair pulled back, no jewelry except her wedding ring. She wanted them to see her clearly, without distraction. When she stepped to the podium, silence fell. She'd prepared a speech, spent weeks refining it with Lucian Thornwell, but standing there, looking at the faces of men who held power over millions of lives, she decided to speak from the heart instead. "My name is Elara Ashford," she began, her voice carrying through the chamber. "A year ago, I was a governess. I had no power, no voice, no way to change anything. When I saw children dying in institutions that were supposed to protect them, I had two choices: stay silent or speak up knowing it would probably destroy me." She paused, meeting the eyes of several MPs who'd opposed the reforms. "I spoke up, and it did nearly destroy me. I was framed, arrested, dragged through the courts and the papers. I was called a liar, a thief, a woman who didn't know her place. But I was also right. And eventually the truth couldn't be buried anymore." She gestured to the gallery where Mrs. Fairchild and several other matrons from reformed institutions sat. "The changes we've made to the orphanage system have saved lives. Measurable, documented lives. Children who would have died from disease or neglect are now healthy. Institutions that were barely standing are now functioning, but that's not enough." Her voice strengthened. "Because the same systems that failed those children are failing women across this city. We work for wages that don't cover rent. We have no legal recourse when employers abuse us. We're denied education, denied property rights, denied basic medical care. And when we try to speak up, we're told to be quiet and accept our place." She leaned forward, her hands gripping the podium. "I'm here to tell you that we won't be quiet anymore. The women of this city are watching. We're organizing. We're learning that when we stand together, we can't be ignored. You can keep trying to silence us, or you can listen and help us build something better." A murmur ran through the chamber, some approving, many hostile. Lord Harrington stood up, his face red. "This is outrageous. You're advocating for revolution." "I'm advocating for change," Elara cut him off. "The kind of change that happens when people in power choose to do the right thing instead of waiting until they're forced to. You can lead this, or you can be dragged along by it. But it's happening either way." The murmur grew louder, MPs arguing among themselves. Then a voice cut through the chaos. "I second Her Grace's proposal for a formal inquiry into labor conditions for working women." Elara looked up, startled to see a young MP she didn't recognize standing in support. Then another stood. "I second as well." And another. "Hear, hear." Within minutes, a dozen MPs had voiced support, not enough to guarantee victory, but enough to force a vote. The chairman called for order, and after a tense debate, the vote was held. It passed. Barely. But it passed. Elara walked out of Parliament to find Lucian waiting outside, Captain Garrett beside him. "How did it go?" Lucian asked. "We won. Sort of. They're launching an inquiry." "That's a start." "It's more than a start. It's proof that this works. That speaking up, making noise, refusing to be ignored, it actually changes things." Lucian pulled her close, right there on the steps of Parliament, with journalists watching and MPs glaring. "I'm proud of you. We did this together." "No, you did this. I just gave you the platform. You're the one who had the courage to use it." That night the House was quiet for once. No meetings, no strategy sessions, just the two of them in the study Lucian had built for her. Elara sat at her desk, reading through the latest batch of letters. One in particular caught her attention, from a young woman who'd been working in a factory, organizing other women to demand safer conditions. "Your speech gave us courage," the letter said. "We're not backing down. We're fighting for what you showed us was possible." Elara set the letter down and looked at Lucian, who was reading a bill proposal across the room. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Everything you gave up to be here?" He looked up, considering the question seriously. No. I gave up parties I hated and approval from people whose opinions I don't respect. What I gained, he gestured around the study, at the letters, at her. This is real. Everything else was just performance. Even if it gets harder, even if they never fully accept us, especially then. Elara nodded, feeling something settle in her chest. Good, because I have about 15 new projects I want to start. Lucian laughed. Of course you do. 5 years later, Elara stood in the newly opened Vance Medical Training Institute, a school dedicated to teaching women medicine, nursing, and public health. It was housed in a renovated building that had once been one of Pembroke's properties, seized and repurposed after his conviction. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The first class of students, 20 women from all walks of life, sat in neat rows, their faces eager and determined. Elara addressed them from the front of the room, her voice steady and sure. They're going to tell you that you don't belong here, she said, that medicine is men's work, that you're wasting your time trying to break into a profession that doesn't want you. They'll mock you, dismiss you, try to make you feel small. She paused, meeting each woman's eyes. Don't listen to them. You belong here because you chose to be here, because you're willing to work harder than anyone else to prove them wrong, and because the world needs doctors who actually understand what it's like to be ignored by the medical system. One of the students, a former housemaid named Margaret, raised her hand tentatively. Your Grace, what do we do when they won't let us practice? When we finish our training and no hospital will hire us? You build your own, Elara said simply. You find the places that need you, the neighborhoods no one else will serve, the patients no one else will treat, and you go there. You make yourselves indispensable. And when they try to shut you down, you make so much noise they can't ignore you. Margaret smiled, and around her the other women straightened in their seats. After the class, Elara walked through the building with Mrs. Fairchild, who now oversaw several educational programs across the city. You've built something remarkable, Mrs. Fairchild said. We've built something remarkable, Elara corrected. I couldn't have done any of this alone. True, but you were the one who started it. You were the one who refused to stay invisible. They stepped outside into the courtyard, where a dedication plaque had been installed that morning. The Vance Medical Training Institute founded. 1849. In recognition that healing requires both knowledge and courage, Elara traced the words with her fingers, feeling the weight of everything they represented. That evening, she and Lucien hosted a dinner at their home, a regular occurrence now, gatherings of reformers, activists, politicians willing to listen, and women who'd found their voices and weren't letting go. The table was loud with debate and laughter, wine flowing freely, ideas bouncing around like sparks. Elara sat at one end, Lucien at the other, and she caught his eye across the chaos. He smiled at her, that same smile from their wedding day, full of love and exasperation and complete acceptance. After the guests left, they stood together in the now quiet dining room. Remember when you said marrying me wouldn't be a quiet life? Lucien asked. I do. You were right. I usually am. He pulled her close, and Elara leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Do you think we've done enough? She asked quietly. Changed enough? No. I don't think we'll ever feel like we've done enough. There's always more work, more fights, more people who need help. That's what I'm afraid of, that we'll spend our whole lives fighting and it still won't be enough. Maybe not. But every woman who walks through that institute, every child who grows up healthy because we reformed those orphanages, every person who finds their voice because we showed them it was possible. That's not nothing. That's real. Elara thought about the letters that still arrived daily, the women organizing in factories, the girls learning to read in the schools they'd helped fund, the slow, grinding progress that happened when enough people decided the old way wasn't acceptable anymore. You're right, she said. It is real. And we're not done yet. No, Elara agreed, smiling against his chest. We're not. 10 years after that rainy day when she'd yelled at a duke in the street, Elara Ashford stood in the House of Commons, not testifying this time, but attending the vote on the Women's Medical Practice Act, legislation that would finally, formally, allow women to train and practice medicine in England. The gallery was packed with women who'd fought for this moment, Students from the Institute, nurses, reformers, ordinary women who'd written letters and organized petitions and refused to accept that change was impossible. The vote came down to a narrow margin, but when the chairman announced the results, the word "I" echoed through the chamber. It had passed. The gallery erupted, women cheering, crying, embracing each other. Alara felt tears stream down her own face as she gripped Lucian's hand. They'd won. Not just this vote, but something bigger. They'd proven that the world could change, that systems built on exclusion and power could be challenged and broken and rebuilt into something better. Outside, reporters mobbed them, shouting questions. "Your Grace, how does it feel to have won?" Alara paused, considering the question. "It feels like the beginning," she said, "not the end." Because there was still work to do, still fights to win, still people who needed voices and advocates and someone willing to stand up and make noise. But standing there, surrounded by women who'd fought beside her, with Lucien's hand in hers, and the knowledge that they'd actually changed the law, that felt like proof that the impossible was just difficult, not insurmountable. That night, alone in their study, Alara pulled out the first letter she'd ever received, the one from the young factory worker who'd said Alara's speech had given her courage. She'd kept them all, hundreds of letters now, filling shelves in her study, proof that what they'd done mattered. She added today's newest letters to the collection and turned to find Lucian watching her from the doorway. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That a year ago I was nobody. And now," she gestured at the letters, the study, the life they'd built. "Now I'm somebody. We're somebody, and it still feels unreal." "You were always somebody, Alara." The world just finally caught up. She crossed the room and kissed him, slow and deep, and full of 10 years of partnership and love and fighting side by side. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me when I was invisible, for fighting with me when it would have been easier to walk away, for being exactly the kind of stubborn, impossible man I needed. Thank you for yelling at me in that street, for making me uncomfortable, for showing me that power means nothing if you don't use it for something good." They stood there together, two people who'd found each other in the chaos and built something that mattered. The story didn't end there, of course. There would be more fights, more challenges, more moments when the world pushed back and they had to push harder. But that was all right, because Alara Vance, Alara Ashford now, had learned something crucial in those years of fighting. You didn't have to be perfect to make a difference. You didn't have to have all the answers or never make mistakes. You just had to be willing to speak up when silence was easier, to stand firm when backing down was safer, to believe that one voice could become many, and many voices could change the world. She'd started as a woman who refused to stay invisible. She'd become a woman who made sure others could be seen too, and that, more than any title or law or reform, was the victory that mattered most. Years later, when students at the Institute asked her how she'd done it, how she'd gone from governess to duchess to reformer who'd changed the course of history, Alara always gave the same answer. "I got angry. I refused to accept that things had to stay the way they were, and I found people who were willing to fight beside me. The rest was just stubbornness and a complete inability to know when to quit." Then she'd smile and add, "Also, I yelled at a duke in the rain. That helped." Because some stories start with grand plans and careful strategy. But the best ones, the ones that actually change things, start with someone who's had enough, who speaks up even when their voice shakes, who refuses to be invisible one moment longer. And sometimes, if they're very lucky, they find someone willing to listen, someone willing to stand beside them and fight, someone who sees them exactly as they are and says, "Yes, this matters, you matter, let's change the world together." That was Alara's story. Not a fairy tale where everything ended perfectly, but a real story about real change, built by imperfect people who loved each other enough to keep fighting even when it was hard. And in the end, that was worth more than any perfect ending could ever be.